There's a moment that comes to every person who's ever dared to act on what they believe. It's that moment when the world looks at what you've done and demands an explanation. Not because you've done wrong, but because you've done different. And in that moment, you'll feel pressure to shrink, pressure to explain away your conviction, pressure to apologize for being exactly who you were created to be. Malcolm Stewart stood in front of the City Planning Commission on a Tuesday morning that would define the rest of his career. In his hands were blueprints for a building that violated every conventional principle of urban architecture. The structure spiraled upward in a way that seemed to defy logic, with gardens cascading down its exterior walls and solar panels integrated into surfaces that traditional architects would have left solid and imposing. 23 members of that commission sat before him, and their faces told him everything he needed to know. They thought he was crazy. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Stewart, we appreciate your creativity, but this design simply doesn't fit with our city's architectural standards. Perhaps you'd like to reconsider? Maybe redesign something more in line with what we've approved in the past?" What they were really asking for was an apology. They wanted Malcolm to apologize for thinking differently, for seeing what they couldn't see, for having the audacity to imagine a building that didn't exist in their paradigm. And here's what you need to understand. Most people in that moment would have folded. Most people would have said, "You're right, I got carried away." Let me bring you something more acceptable, because we've been conditioned to believe that when people disagree with our actions, we owe them an apology. But Malcolm did something that changed everything. He closed his portfolio, looked at each member of that commission and said, "I appreciate your time, but I won't be redesigning this. This building represents what architecture can become, and I believe in it completely." He walked out of that room without approval, without funding, and without support. His colleagues told him he'd committed professional suicide. His mentor stopped returning his calls. For 3 years, that design sat in his drawer while he took smaller projects just to survive. People would ask him, "Don't you regret being so stubborn? Don't you wish you'd just compromised?" And every time, his answer was the same. "I have regrets about many things, but standing behind my vision isn't one of them." You see, there's a fundamental difference between regret and apology that most people never understand. Regret is what you feel when you genuinely make a mistake, when you harm someone, when you act without integrity, when you violate your own principles. That kind of regret requires genuine apology and correction. But what the world often demands is something entirely different. The world wants you to apologize for your convictions. It wants you to apologize for refusing to fit into boxes that were built for someone else's comfort. When you apologize for actions that stem from your authentic purpose, you're not being humble. You're committing an act of self-betrayal. You're telling the universe that your inner knowing, that voice that drove you to act, was wrong. You're teaching yourself not to trust the very instincts that were designed to guide you toward your destiny. Think about what happens to a seed. When you plant it in the ground, it doesn't apologize for breaking through the soil. It doesn't say to the earth, "I'm sorry for disrupting your smooth surface." That seed has one job: to become what it was created to be. The breaking, the pushing, the disruption, these aren't unfortunate side effects. They're necessary components of growth. Your actions, when they come from genuine purpose, are the same way. They're going to disrupt somebody's comfortable reality. They're going to challenge existing systems. They're going to make people uncomfortable. And uncomfortable people will always ask you for an apology. But here's the truth they won't tell you. When you apologize for purposeful action, you don't just diminish yourself. You rob the world of what it needs, because your action wasn't random. It wasn't arbitrary. It came from a place of design, from a specific assignment that was embedded in you before you took your first breath. When you apologize for that, you're essentially saying that the designer made a mistake in creating you with that particular capacity, that particular vision, that particular way of seeing the world. Malcolm's building eventually got built, not in his city, but in another country where someone with vision recognized what he'd created. Today, that design has been replicated in 47 cities across 6 continents. It's become the standard for sustainable urban architecture, cutting energy consumption by 60% and increasing green space in metropolitan areas. The very commission that rejected him now uses his principles in their planning guidelines. But none of that would have happened if Malcolm had apologized for his vision that Tuesday morning. What are you apologizing for? What action have you taken? Or what action do you need to take that's requiring an apology you don't owe? Maybe you started a business that your family didn't understand, and you keep apologizing for not following their traditional path. Maybe you ended a relationship that everyone else thought was perfect, and you keep apologizing for choosing your peace over their perception. Maybe you pursued an education, a career, a lifestyle that didn't fit someone else's expectations, and you've spent years apologizing for your choice. Stop it. Stop apologizing for actions that came from your core, from your purpose, from that place inside you that knows things your rational mind hasn't figured out yet. Because every time you apologize for purposeful action, you send a message to yourself and to everyone watching you. You tell yourself that external validation matters more than internal conviction. You teach others that standing firm is foolishness rather than strength. Your actions are seeds. When they're planted in purpose, they're designed to grow into something the world needs, even if the world doesn't recognize that need immediately. Malcolm planted a seed that day he walked out of that commission meeting. It looked like failure. It felt like rejection. But that seed was quietly doing what seeds do, waiting for the right season, the right soil, the right moment to break through and become what it was always meant to be. The prison of false apologies is real, and millions of people live in it. They apologize for their dreams, their standards, their boundaries, their gifts, their intensity, their difference. They spend their lives saying sorry for being who they are. And in doing so, they forfeit the very thing that makes them irreplaceable. You were not created to be apologetic about your existence. You were created to be unapologetic about your purpose. When purpose moves through you, it carries an authority that cannot be manufactured, cannot be borrowed, and cannot be voted on by committee. This authority doesn't come from your credentials, your experience, or the approval of those who came before you. It comes from alignment between who you are and what you were sent here to do. Keisha Washington discovered this authority on the first day she walked into Riverside Elementary School as a fifth-grade teacher. The school sat in a neighborhood where statistics predicted failure, where students were labeled before they even opened a textbook, where the system had already decided what these children could and couldn't achieve. The principal handed her a curriculum binder 3 inches thick and said, "Follow this exactly." These students need structure, not experiments. That binder represented decades of educational theory, research-backed methodologies, and district-approved lesson plans. It represented the collective wisdom of administrators who'd never spent a full week in a classroom like hers. And as Keisha flipped through those pages, something inside her rejected every word. Not because the curriculum was evil, but because it was wrong for these specific children, wrong for this specific moment, wrong for what she knew she was called to do. Within 3 weeks, she'd abandoned the binder entirely. She brought in music when the curriculum said mathematics. She taught history through storytelling when the manual demanded memorization. She let students teach each other when protocol required her to lecture. She turned her classroom into something that looked nothing like education was supposed to look, and everything like learning actually happening. The other teachers noticed first. They'd walk past her room and see controlled chaos. Students debating, building, creating, moving. It made them uncomfortable because it exposed their own compliance. Soon, the whispers started. "She's not following procedure. She's making us all look bad." Those students need discipline, not freedom. When the assistant principal called her in for a meeting 6 weeks into the semester, Keisha knew what was coming. The woman sat across from her with a stack of lesson plans, the ones Keisha was supposed to have submitted but hadn't. "Miss Washington, we need to discuss your teaching methods. Several staff members have expressed concern that you're not adhering to our established curriculum. I need you to understand that we have these systems for a reason." Here's where most people break. Here's where the pressure to conform becomes unbearable because it's wrapped in reasonable language. We have these systems for a reason. Sounds logical. It sounds responsible. It sounds like the voice of wisdom speaking to inexperience. But what Keisha understood in that moment was something profound. She didn't need permission to operate in her purpose. "I understand your concern," Keisha responded, her voice steady. "But I won't be returning to that curriculum. What I'm doing is working, and I need you to trust that I know these students and what they need." The assistant principal's face hardened. "Miss Washington, this isn't optional. Either you follow district guidelines or we'll need to reconsider your position here." Keisha didn't apologize. She didn't soften her stance. She didn't offer a compromise that would have diluted everything she was building. She simply said, "Then I guess you'll need to make that decision. But until you do, I'll continue teaching the way I know is right." Authority isn't loud. It doesn't argue or defend itself into exhaustion. Authority simply states truth and stands on it. When you know you're operating within your jurisdiction, within the specific area where your gifts, your passion, and the world's needs intersect, you don't need to convince anyone. You just need to act. For 8 weeks, Keisha taught under the threat of termination. Every day, she expected to be called into an office and dismissed. Every day, she prepared her students as if it might be her last day with them. And every day, something remarkable happened in that classroom. Students who'd been written off as unteachable were reading above grade level. Children who'd been labeled as troublemakers were solving complex problems. The transformation was undeniable. Then parent-teacher conferences arrived. In most classrooms, 3 or 4 parents showed up. In Keisha's classroom, every single parent came. And they didn't come with complaints. They came with gratitude. They came with stories of children who suddenly loved learning, who talked about school at dinner, who believed they were capable of extraordinary things. Word spread. Parents from other classes started requesting transfers. Local media heard about the teacher doing something different and achieving impossible results. The same administrators who threatened her position suddenly wanted to feature her methods in the district newsletter. They asked her to present at teacher training sessions. They wanted to know her secret, wanted to bottle what she was doing and distribute it across every school. And here's what's critical. Keisha didn't gloat. She didn't say, "I told you so." She simply continued doing what she'd been doing all along, because her goal was never to prove anyone wrong. Her goal was to serve the assignment she'd been given. This is what happens when you refuse to apologize for operating in your authority. You don't need to fight your way to recognition. You don't need to campaign for validation. You simply do the work you were designed to do with such excellence that the results speak louder than any defense you could have offered. But understand this clearly. Authority and arrogance are not the same thing. Arrogance says, "I'm right and everyone else is wrong." Authority says, "I'm responsible for this specific assignment and I will fulfill it regardless of opposition." Arrogance needs to prove itself. Authority only needs to be itself. Every person walking this earth has an area of jurisdiction, a specific domain where their gifts are supposed to operate, where their insights are meant to create change, where their actions carry weight. The tragedy is that most people never step into that jurisdiction because they're waiting for permission. They're waiting for someone with a title, a position, a platform to tell them they're allowed to act on what they know. But permission isn't how purpose works. Moses didn't get permission from Pharaoh to deliver a nation. Rosa Parks didn't get permission from the bus company to keep her seat. Every person who ever changed anything acted first and dealt with the consequences after. They understood that when you're operating in your true assignment, you already have all the authority you need. Keisha's students from that first year are adults now. They became engineers, doctors, teachers, entrepreneurs. They became people who refuse to accept limitations others try to place on them. Because they learned early that authority doesn't come from approval, it comes from purpose. They watched their teacher stand alone and win, not by fighting, but by simply being excellent at what she was sent to do. What's your jurisdiction? Where has purpose assigned you authority that you've been afraid to exercise because you don't have unanimous approval? The board won't all agree. The family won't all understand. The colleagues won't all support you. And that's fine, because their agreement was never the source of your authority anyway. Stop waiting for permission to do what you already know you're supposed to do. Conviction without action is merely opinion. But action without unwavering conviction becomes compromise the moment pressure arrives. What separates those who transform their world from those who merely observe it is not talent, not opportunity, not even courage in the traditional sense. It's the capacity to carry the weight of a decision through valleys where everyone questions whether you should have made it at all. Antonio Silva sat in his apartment on his 32nd birthday counting the money he had left. $417. That's what remained of his savings, his credit, his financial life. 3 years earlier, he'd had over $200,000, a secure job at a consulting firm, and the respect of everyone who knew him. Now he had a failed business, a reputation as the man who threw everything away, and a phone that had stopped ringing months ago. His sister had called that morning. "Tony, please, Just admit this didn't work and come back to reality. Dad can get you a position at his firm. You can rebuild, but you have to let this go. She meant well. They all meant well, his family, his former colleagues, the friends who'd slowly distanced themselves as his venture continued to bleed money and produce no visible results. What Antonio had tried to build seemed simple on the surface. He'd created a distribution system for small farmers in developing regions, connecting them directly to buyers in urban markets through a technology platform that eliminated the middlemen who'd been exploiting these farmers for generations. Everyone told him it was noble. Everyone told him it was impractical. Banks rejected his loan applications. Investors politely declined meetings after hearing his pitch. The business journals that had once featured him as a rising executive now used him as a cautionary tale about passion overriding pragmatism. But here's what nobody understood. Antonio wasn't being stubborn. He was being faithful. There's a difference that looks identical from the outside but feels completely different on the inside. Stubbornness says, I refuse to change because changing would mean admitting I was wrong. Faithfulness says, I refuse to change because I know what I'm carrying and I know what it's meant to become. Every morning, Antonio would wake up and review the projections again. The numbers still made sense. The need was still massive. The solution was still viable. What was missing wasn't the validity of the idea, it was the patience to wait for the right season, the right partners, the right convergence of circumstances that would turn years of preparation into sudden breakthrough. His breaking point came on a Wednesday evening. He'd just finished another unsuccessful meeting with potential investors. As he walked through the city, he passed a restaurant where his old team from the consulting firm was having dinner. Through the window, he could see them laughing, celebrating someone's promotion. For a moment, he stood there watching the life he'd left behind, and something inside him cracked. He almost walked in, almost joined them, almost asked if that job offer was still available. The words were forming in his mind. You were right. I was wrong. I'm sorry for wasting 3 years on a dream that was never going to work. Those words would have been so easy to say. They would have brought instant relief, instant reconciliation, instant return to normalcy. But as he reached for the door, his phone vibrated. It was an email from a farmer in Guatemala named Carlos, one of the first people who'd signed up for Antonio's platform. The email was simple. Mr. Silva, I don't know if your business will survive, but I want you to know that what you built changed my family's life. Last month, I made more money than I made all of last year combined. My daughter starts university next month. Please don't give up. We need this. Antonio stepped back from that restaurant door. He walked home in the rain without an umbrella, and by the time he reached his apartment, he was soaked, but something had shifted. He realized that apologizing for his vision, returning to safety, admitting defeat wasn't just about him. It was about Carlos. It was about the 1,700 other farmers who'd put their trust in a system that gave them dignity. It was about the future farmers who needed someone to prove that a different way was possible. Unwavering conviction isn't about you. That's the secret most people miss. They think standing firm is an act of ego, a refusal to admit mistakes, a stubborn clinging to pride. But real conviction, the kind that changes things, is about stewardship. It's about understanding that you're carrying something bigger than your comfort, your reputation, or your immediate circumstances. 6 months after that rainy night, Antonio's platform caught the attention of a social impact fund in Europe. They'd been watching his progress, impressed not by his success but by his persistence. They invested $2 million. Within a year, the platform had expanded to 12 countries. Within 3 years, it was facilitating over $50 million in direct transactions between farmers and buyers, cutting out exploitation and returning profit to the people who actually worked the land. Today, that platform supports over 40,000 farming families. It's been featured in international development journals as a model for ethical commerce. Antonio has been invited to speak at conferences worldwide. But here's what's remarkable. When people ask him about those 3 years in the wilderness, he doesn't call them his struggle years. He calls them his refining years. Those years taught me the difference between what I wanted and what I was willing to die for. He tells audiences, when everything got stripped away, the money, the respect, the security, what remained was the only thing that mattered. I learned that I wasn't building a business. I was fulfilling a responsibility to people who had no other advocate. This is the weight of unwavering conviction. It's not light. It's not easy. There will be moments when apologizing feels like relief, when backing down feels like wisdom, when compromise feels like maturity. But if what you're carrying is genuine, if it's rooted in purpose rather than preference, then your refusal to apologize isn't about protecting your ego. It's about protecting the people and possibilities connected to your assignment. Think about what happens when someone with a genuine solution quits because the journey gets difficult. Think about the ripple effects. When a person called to create change backs down because criticism becomes uncomfortable, it's not just their loss. It's the loss of everyone who needed what they were building, everyone who was waiting for someone to be brave enough to stand when standing wasn't popular. Your unwavering conviction gives others permission to hold their ground. When people see you refuse to apologize for purposeful action, when they watch you carry your vision through opposition, when they witness you emerge on the other side with your integrity intact, something happens in them. They start to believe that maybe they don't have to fold either. Maybe they can stand. Maybe their dream isn't foolish. Maybe their calling is worth the cost. Antonio's apartment still has that email from Carlos framed on the wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The reminder that conviction isn't just about believing in yourself, it's about believing in what your actions make possible for others. It's about understanding that when you refuse to apologize for purpose-driven decisions, you're not just defending your choice, you're defending every person who will benefit from that choice, every life that will be touched by what you're building, every future that depends on you not giving up. The responsibility of unwavering conviction is this. You don't just owe it to yourself to stand firm. You owe it to everyone who's counting on you to finish what you started. Everything you do today is writing a script for someone tomorrow. Every stand you take, every principle you refuse to compromise, every moment you choose conviction over comfort, these aren't isolated incidents. They're building blocks of a legacy that will outlive your heartbeat and outreach your hands. The question isn't whether you leave a legacy. The question is, what kind of legacy will you leave? Malcolm Stewart's building stands in Singapore now, a testament to the vision he refused to apologize for. But something more significant happened because of his unwavering stance. A young architecture student named Jennifer Chen saw photographs of that building during her sophomore year at university. She'd been designing structures that her professors called too ambitious, not grounded in reality. She was on the verge of switching majors, convinced that her way of seeing buildings as living organisms that breathe with their environment was incompatible with professional architecture. Then she read Malcolm's story. She learned about the rejection, the years of waiting, the moment he chose his vision over approval, and something ignited in her. She stayed in architecture. Today, she's designing structures that make Malcolm's work look conventional. And when young designers come to her doubting their unconventional ideas, she tells them about a man who walked out of a commission meeting with nothing but his integrity intact. That's legacy. It's not what you accomplish, it's who you empower to accomplish what they couldn't have without your example. Keisha Washington retired from teaching last year after 34 years in education. Her methods are now integrated into teacher training programs across the nation. But the real legacy isn't in the curriculum guides that bear her influence. It's in the students who became teachers because they experienced what education could be. It's in the parents who learned to advocate for their children's authentic learning styles. It's in the administrators who finally understood that compliance and excellence are not synonyms. One of her former students, Michael, is now a principal at a school in the same district where Keisha taught. When teachers come to him asking permission to try unconventional methods, his answer is always the same. Don't ask me for permission to do what you know is right. If you believe in it, do it with excellence and let the results speak. He learned that from watching his 5th grade teacher stand alone against a system that demanded conformity. Legacy multiplies. What you refuse to apologize for doesn't just affect your generation, it shapes the courage available to the next one. Antonio Silva's platform continues to grow, but something unexpected emerged from his journey. During those 3 years when everyone thought he was foolish, he kept a journal. He documented every doubt, every financial crisis, every moment he wanted to quit, and every reason he didn't. After his platform gained recognition, a publisher discovered those journals and asked to print them. Antonio hesitated. The journals revealed his weakness, his fear, his humanity. They showed him at his lowest points, questioning everything. But then he realized something crucial. People don't need another story about someone who had it all figured out. They need stories about people who didn't have it figured out but moved forward anyway. He published those journals under the title, The Space Between Vision and Reality. That book has sold over 1 million copies. But more importantly, it's become a manual for entrepreneurs working in the gap between what they see and what others can see. A woman in Kenya read that book while building a clean water initiative that everyone told her was too expensive, too complicated, too idealistic. She was ready to abandon the project. Antonio's journals gave her language for what she was experiencing, not failure, but the necessary season between planting and harvest. Her initiative now provides clean water to over 200 villages. She's never met Antonio, but his refusal to apologize for those difficult years gave her permission to endure her own. This is how legacy works. It crosses oceans. It jumps generations. It gives strength to people whose names you'll never know, whose faces you'll never see, whose battles you'll never witness. But they'll fight those battles and win them because you fought yours and won. The compound effect of unapologetic living is incalculable. When Malcolm stood firm, he created space for Jennifer. When Jennifer designs boldly, she creates space for hundreds of future architects. When Keisha refused to apologize for her teaching methods, she shaped Michael. When Michael leads with that same conviction, he shapes thousands of students. When Antonio documented his struggle, he strengthened someone in Kenya. When she provides clean water, she saves lives and inspires others to tackle impossible problems. You are not the end point. You are a link in a chain that extends far beyond what you can see from where you're standing. And the strength of that entire chain depends on whether you hold your position when pressure comes. So, examine your life right now. What have you been apologizing for that actually deserves to be defended? What decision did you make from a place of genuine conviction that you've been second-guessing because it cost you comfort? What standard have you set that people keep asking you to lower? What boundary have you established that others keep pressuring you to dissolve? What dream have you been carrying that the practical voices around you keep labeling as unrealistic? Stop apologizing. Not because you're perfect, you're not. Not because you never make mistakes, you do. But stop apologizing for the things that came from your core, from your purpose, from that place inside you that knows things before your mind can explain them. Stop apologizing for actions that align with your values even when they conflict with others' expectations. Stop apologizing for being excellent when mediocrity would be more comfortable for those around you. Because here's the truth that will define everything. The next generation is watching. Your children are watching. Your colleagues are watching. People you'll never meet are watching through the ripple effects of your decisions. And what they're learning from you isn't what you say about conviction, it's whether you live it when living it costs you something. Malcolm, Keisha, and Antonio never set out to become examples. They set out to be faithful to what they carried. The legacy was a byproduct of integrity, a natural result of refusing to betray their assignment for the sake of approval. And now, years later, their names are attached to movements they didn't try to start, influencing people they never tried to reach, creating change they never tried to calculate. That's available to you, not fame, legacy, not recognition, impact, not applause, transformation, but it requires something from you today. It requires you to look at whatever you've been apologizing for and ask one simple question. Am I apologizing because I was actually wrong? Or am I apologizing because standing firm is uncomfortable? If you were wrong, apologize and correct course. That's wisdom. But if you're only uncomfortable, if you're only facing opposition, if you're only dealing with people who can't see what you see, then stand. Stand without apology. Stand without defense. Stand because the people connected to your purpose need you to finish what you started. Your unapologetic action today becomes their permission tomorrow. Make it count.